Hello, my name is Councillor Matthew Brown and I'm the leader of Preston City Council. I'm really delighted to be invited to the Social Innovation Global Forum, I hope I pronounced that correctly, in South Korea to give a lecture on community wealth building. I also do some work for the Democracy Collaborative, which is a think and do tank that's involved with implementing these ideas in many places. It was founded in the United States, but I'm privileged to be able to promote community wealth building in the UK and on occasions actually overseas as well. So for me personally, it's a very exciting time, but more importantly, I just think these ideas are now coming into the forefront. So what I'm going to suggest is that, that the lecture I give to you will be based around the presentation which will have been provided to you all, hopefully translated in time for this event. And what I'll do is I'll speak around the slides that you'll have in front of you. There'll be around 20 or so slides that'll be in front of you, and hopefully what I say will make sense based around the presentation which has been provided. So I'm asking you to cast your minds back now to 2007. Now 2007, I'm old enough to remember it, I'm sure some of you did as well. That was when we had a global economic crisis, and that came out of nowhere. There was not many people who were predicting that the economy was going to collapse around us on both sides of the Atlantic in other parts of the world. And it's my position that that economic crash came from decades of neoliberal economic policies. So it's the deregulation of the financial sector, privatisation of public assets. In the UK, we had the demutualisation of building societies, which were member-owned financial institutions. So being put together, that led to that economic crash, and it was a situation where, where instead of actually investment being for the long term, it was often very short term and speculative. So, in the United Kingdom, from that, we've had a situation where things haven't really improved in the last 10 years because inequality is not improving, living standards are actually falling, life expectancy in some cases is falling in the UK, investment and productivity has not really recovered, bank lending to businesses is very, very weak, and crucially we've had austerity, which has meant that there's been huge cutbacks to the local public sector. And it was estimated there was £20,000 per family in the United Kingdom that was used to bail out the economy at the time. So, if that amount of public money is going to be put into the financial sector and the economy, then austerity is a very likely thing that may happen by some governments. And from 2010, with the Conservative-led government in the UK, it's been very devastating, the cuts to services and benefits and other forms of the public sector. So in 2011 is the year that my party, the Labour Party, won control of Preston City Council. So not a particularly large council, but we're a council with many big ideas. And we came to be really proud to actually win an election and get enough seats so we had a majority to implement our programme and work with partners to actually make our community better. But, as well as having austerity with big cutbacks to local government, we also had a situation where the City Council had been for quite a number of years, over a decade, trying to attract large developers into our community. So we had a tie bond regeneration scheme for our city centre, and in today's money that's probably worth about £1.2 billion. And the idea with that was that public assets would be put into a vehicle 50-50 with a large global developer. What would have happened then is it would have brought in the retail, it would have brought in a cinema, restaurants, housing, and that would have created lots of jobs. That was the idea, but that scheme was abandoned as well at the same time, 2 or 3 years after the economic crash. So community wealth building, the Preston model specifically for our communities, actually came out of those two realities. So big business doesn't want to come in and invest in your community, and then in addition to that, we've got austerity. So you're very much in a straitjacket that you actually want to do things that are positive, but it's very difficult when those two aspects are actually getting in the way to actually make things better for people within your community. So specifically, I'll go through a number of policies which are in front of you in the slides and what we've done since then. And it really needs partnership, because we really achieve a lot more if we work with the partners in Preston. We're lucky in the sense we've got lots of what's known as anchor institutions. So those are place-based institutions like universities and hospitals, further education colleges, housing associations, police forces, and others that are actually not going to get up and leave. They're always going to remain within the community. So we work with an organisation called the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, which is a not-for-profit think tank, and they work with ourselves and our place-based institutions to actually redirect over, I think by 2017, 4 years after the project began, redirect an extra £75 million in what they procured in goods and services to locally based businesses. It's estimated that's equivalent just in 1 year to an extra 1,600 jobs in Preston. So much of the public pound is actually going to local companies, often SME companies that are based within our community, family-owned businesses, rather than potentially large multinationals who previously would have won a lot of those contracts. So we're very proud of that, and again, it's a city coming together to really regenerate and uplift the community. We also encourage insourcing, so we're quite keen to bring back services into the local public sector. So the council has insourced the management of two facilities, and one is actually it's a cafe stroke conference centre, and it has weddings as well, back into the local public sector. One of our anchor institutions, Community Gateway, has brought back grounds maintenance into its organisation as a not-for-profit housing association. And our local police force have brought back custody suites from an outsourcing firm called G4S. So that means that the service is under democratic control, and they're also getting, the people who work in the services also have access to trade unions and all the benefits that come from being in the public sector. Secondly, we've worked with our public pension fund, and this is the what will be the retirement earnings of our local public sector workers. So that's councils, further education colleges and other parts of the public sector in the county of Lancashire, which Preston's a part of. We've persuaded the fund to invest £100 million in both Preston and our neighbouring district, South Ribble. So in Preston directly, that's led to what is now £40 million worth of investment. So it's about to start renovating an old hotel which was owned by the local public sector after it stopped being a hotel, and that was offloaded from the public sector when austerity came. And it's also built some student flats, and on both of these developments they've used a not-for-profit development company which is located around 2 or 3 miles from Preston. We're using local companies and local labour as far as we legally can, and that's led to a virtuous cycle of economic activity, again, where more jobs are created. We're very keen on putting more democracy in the economy, and we're trying to transform capitalism hopefully into something different as far as we can. It's quite a radical council. So we're working with the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation in the Basque region of Spain, and that's a company which is established over decades in the Basque country, over 120 worker-owned businesses with I think a turnover now of over €25 billion. So they're working with us to establish 10 new worker-owned businesses in Preston, and we're doing that with our university and also Preston Cooperative Development Network and others. So already we've got a food business which we're hoping will supply to the local public sector. We've got a taxi company that involves our taxi drivers in Preston, which is organising a worker cooperative. We've got a digital company as well, which again is going to supply the university. So that involves graduates and a lecturer there. We're going further. We're going to look at establishing a cooperative education centre. We're looking at worker cooperatives in construction and social care. We're also working with our minority communities and refugees to establish worker cooperatives there. Very exciting work, and that's trying to actually build something new and build something more democratic to respond to the systemic failure which has really, run down our city for so many years and decades. We're also looking to establish a North West Community Bank. So this will be a regional cooperative bank with partners in Wirral and Liverpool, and that's going to lend to a population of 3 million in the region. And we believe we need a banking alternative because the large banks caused the economic crash of 2008, and crucially they extract wealth out of our communities. Often they're shutting branches down in our communities, and crucially they don't lend to local businesses and in some instances individuals as much as they should do. So the German banking system, for example, is very good at lending to local businesses. Ours is not so good, so we're looking to establish an alternative. We're trying to raise wages in Preston, so we're the first living wage employer. So the Living Wage Foundation is again another charity and a movement in the UK which encourages institutions to pay 20% higher than the government minimum. So we were the first employer in the north of England within Preston. We got 60 other institutions and businesses that are living wage employers as well. So that's very positive. And you know, we're joint best out of 14 councils for people who receive the real living wage of £9.30 an hour in Preston, and you know, very proud of that because it can lift people out of poverty, and it's that's figures for people who work within our community. Obviously, we're trying to get more people into these institutions who live in our community as well to actually tackle poverty. We're promoting municipal ownership and enterprise, so we're going to build our own quite substantial city centre development, which will be a cinema and restaurant development with a bowling alley, but crucially that's going to be in the ownership of the city, so it's going to be municipal ownership. So we've got a say over local supply chains, the conditions of the workers, who's employed, can we recruit people from marginalised groups or from minority communities within that. But crucially, the profits will actually then go back to the city through a development that will be owned by the city, technically. We're looking to provide public housing again through establishing a housing company, and that is something that councils are looking to do, not just in Preston but in many places, because obviously we're going to face a decline in house building, no doubt following the current pandemic that we've had and the economic fallouts. We've got a planning system and planning policies in Preston which encourage locally based suppliers and labour, so that's in the public and private sectors, and that's led to many people getting opportunities there. And we're looking to refresh our community wealth building strategy soon, to look at a community land trust in Preston, looking at getting our institutions to recruit people in our most deprived areas and areas of highest unemployment, and those who've lost their jobs, hopefully from COVID. We're looking at renewable energy, district community energy networks, and also looking at further supporting democratic companies in the renewable energy sector. So, you know, if there's going to be retrofitting schemes, which is likely to happen, then we won't want to look at worker cooperatives and employee-owned businesses doing that. So moving on, these are some examples of how these ideas are really, have really worked, and there's a really strong evidence base from many places. So firstly, we got the on the slide you can see the Bank of North Dakota, which is a publicly owned bank in a state of America, North Dakota. Then on the left we've got the Sparkasse, which is a German not-for-profit banking system. And crucially, in North Dakota, I think about 70% of banking is done through this state-owned bank, which is devolved down into communities. And when that economic crash of 2008 came, unemployment was about 40% of the rest of America. And the fact there was a democratic banking system really contributed to that. And again, the German banking system, the Sparkassen, it's a network of community, not-for-profit and cooperative banks. And areas where the Sparkassen predominated in German villages, towns and cities, they were avoiding recession in 2008, whereas the large banks were being bailed out by the taxpayer in Germany. So working on the alternative, and I mentioned the Northwest Mutual, and why do we want that? Fully licensed, obviously it's going to have a physical presence, an online presence, but as you can see, the balance sheet there, the large banks tend to want to lend to each other than lend to local businesses. They'd rather lend £5 million to each other than, say, 1,000 lots of £10,000 to small businesses. And you can see, again, how lending to SMEs across the Northwest, and this has really hit Preston, by the large banks, has sadly fallen by up to 30%. Just below that is an example of another American example. This is in Alabama. It's the public pension fund in Alabama. And again, they took a decision a number of decades ago to invest at least 10% within that state. And you see on the right the really positive outcomes from that. So that's $28 billion of additional GDP over that period, $14.3 billion of earnings, and nearly 300,000 jobs over a 22-year period. And they've done everything from developing, I think, hotels, and they bought media companies, but also invested in a network of golf courses, which has been very successful and attracts tourists as well. So again, this is the deferred earnings of the public sector workers in Alabama that's being used to actually really build community wealth for the whole communities and actually get a return for the fund as well, which is really positive. So again, in Preston, this is our plans. You can see what was quite a rundown part of Preston in one of our main streets called Friargate, and that had been like that for some years, and the pension fund has now developed some student flats. So again, local companies used, students are now coming to the city centre, which is really positive. It's regenerated the area. The people who were working on the project were paying tax to the local council and other parts of the public sector, so it's a very positive state of affairs. And next you can see the old Park Hotel, which is currently being redeveloped by the pension fund. And again, that's a development that's worth over £20 million, and that's what it'll look like on the right. I mentioned our cinema. That's what our market quarter cinema development will look like. And crucially, yes, it will have commercial operators in there, but that's going to be in the ownership of the city. So again, we're building that, economic democracy and resilience. And again, this is the figures of our public sector spend that we brought back to Preston and Lancashire companies, and 5% was being spent by the end of the financial year in 2012-13. By 2016-17, that was 18.2% within Preston, with Preston-based organisations. So that's an extra £75 million. Across Lancashire, it's doubled from 39% to 79%, and again, that's seen an extra £200 million put back just in 1 year, and that's been a huge, stimulus for our local economy. Next is two cabinet members in Preston City Council. On the left is Robert, and on the right is Peter, and that's them celebrating the fact we brought back that facility back into council control after the previous operator sadly went out of business. And then these are some of our worker cooperatives. The first one has members of the Larder Co-op. There's some volunteers there as well, but that's the first worker co-op out of the Preston model. The second one is a website for the Preston Digital Foundation, and that's recently been established, and it's part of a network of worker cooperatives across the country. And then just after that, it shows the employee-owned businesses we have in Preston. So we've got a number. We've got one called TAS Partnership, which is 10 years old. We've got RCU, which I think it's an engineering firm or accountancy firm. It's some kind of firm that operates in the docks. And then also we've got Richer Sounds, which is this is a really fantastic guy called Julian Richer, I think he's called, and he's actually sold 60% of his company to the employees, and we're privileged to have that in Preston. And crucially, going forward with our community wealth building strategy, we're very keen to convert businesses, especially when the owner retires, into employee-owned businesses. So put together, this has been really positive for our city. We've still got inequality, we've still got too much deprivation, and this comes from decades of neoliberal economics that's really hit our communities. But we were independently assessed the most improved city in the UK for what's known as inclusive growth. So that looks at measures around skills, income, employment, inequality, jobs, health, owner occupation, and the price of housing. And again, you can see in that, in that chart there, and that's I think it was announced in 2019. But you can see that you can basically see that. So it's 2018. It was announced. I do apologise. You can see that. In terms of jobs, we've really outperformed the other cities on the list. So that's 42 cities, including Preston. You can see how employment has increased, and it's my position that the Preston model has really contributed to this. And it's really by taking back control, by working in with institutions to really repatriate wealth into our local communities, so everyone benefits from those policies. That has really led to those improvements. But crucially, the community wealth building movement, it's taken off in many places, and there's many places that are actually, they're actually coming close to overtaking us in the UK. So some examples there are Islington and Haringey are insourcing services back into the local public sector, and Islington is a fantastic example in London. It's former Labour leaders Jeremy Corbyn's constituency, and it's got a very radical Labour council there. And they brought back, I think, £320 million into what is quite a large council in London. And that's led to 1,200 people being, receiving the London real living wage. So, I mean, that is significantly higher in London, the way it's calculated, than the rest of the United Kingdom, the minimum wage. So that's really benefited people there. The Welsh Assembly is what's called the foundational economy, which is similar to community wealth building, but they're also got themselves, they're supporting a cooperative bank, a community bank. Again, that's hopefully going to open next year. So again, it's looking at the issue of who actually owns the banking system. Can we support from the grassroots up, alternative banking arrangements? Plymouth and Oxford are doubling the size of the cooperative economy, and North Ayrshire has recently launched a very radical community wealth building strategy, which is encouraging not only worker ownership, but as I said earlier, conversions to employee ownership. So again, businesses in North Ayrshire in Scotland will be encouraged to become employee-owned businesses. Hackney and Birmingham have commitments to establish municipal energy companies. Now that's very difficult in the UK because of a legislation which is very restrictive. But again, Hackney especially, they've got an energy company which is, providing communities, households and businesses with energy that's generated by the council, and that's renewable energy. Often there's renewable energy facilities on town hall buildings and land which is actually generating energy to the communities in Hackney. London councils are supporting community land trusts, which is a fantastic form of economic development, which actually puts housing developments in the ownership of local communities. So rents and the costs of mortgages are linked to a formula based on the average income within the area, and especially in London, the price of housing is a huge issue. They're very much in the mainstream. We've got a public health sector called the National Health Service, which is looking at its role as an anchor institution, because they employ 1.2 million people in the UK, and they're looking at if they can recruit from areas of highest levels of deprivation, where the health is particularly poor, but also what they can do with the land as well as procurement. Could they potentially support community development and social housing to be developed on land? And similarly with our university sector, they're looking at their role as anchor institutions. So this is all really exciting for me in the United Kingdom, that we're potentially building, if we can bring it to scale, and it's a big if, a new economic model that has begun in Preston, and Preston, it's not where we want it to be, but the ideas and all the parts of the jigsaw really put together really well at the moment. And we do feel when it's put together over the next few years and completed, it will be transformative and will have actually changed our economic model to something better. But crucially, these ideas, they emerged from the American Rust Belt. So we've been inspired by many American cities. So if we start with America, New York City just last month, they released a policy document that promotes community wealth building. So they're looking and have expanded the number of worker co-ops within their community. They're looking at using democratic companies to procure from the not-for-profit hospitals and universities, and they're looking at other things around supporting purchasing cooperatives for food and other things to really put that ownership and resilience in the community. The governor of California, for example, he's committed to explore legislation to establish a publicly owned Bank of California. So again, a lot of American politicians and communities are not convinced Wall Street is actually going to lead to regeneration of communities, the way that behaves, and tackling inequality. So they're creating democratic alternatives as well. In Cincinnati, you've got this very amazing movement which is again growing, and it's looking to work with the largest trade union in America to establish what's known as one worker, one vote union cooperatives. So these are businesses which are unionised, but obviously the ownership of the union members. And again, they're looking to create a number of those businesses in Cincinnati. And again, I think there's conversations about how trade unions in America actually can potentially buy larger companies and convert them into union-supported cooperatives. In addition to that, in Europe, we work with the European Union to look at how public procurement can lead to economic, social and environmental benefits in 7 European cities. So that is work that we're doing, and we're learning from other places like Bologna that is using public purchasing to really encourage environmental benefits. And then also Sydney Council recently adopted a community wealth building approach to procurement. So that's got a very large budget. They want to make sure that ripples through the Sydney economy and tackles poverty and leads to inclusivity in Sydney. And then, there's many other places as well, but Africa is showing interest in community wealth building. So in Kigoma in Tanzania, they're looking at establishing worker cooperatives there and looking at community banking, because apparently the condition of a lot of development from the IMF and others and the World Bank has seen lots of banking assets privatised that was, or forced to be sold off basically, and they're looking at creating alternatives there. So yes, so that is pretty much it, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this conference. I look forward to taking part of the panel later on. I hope that all makes sense, and I just really wish you all the best from over here in Preston in Lancashire. It's been a privilege to be invited to speak on this exciting set of ideas and policies that are really growing and becoming quite revolutionary. And what I'd say is just see what you can do to implement these policies in South Korea. These things can be achieved. There will be resistance because it does threaten many people who've done quite well in the last few decades, but obviously to really tackle the challenges that are out there, we've really got to build something new and something really resilient. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a really good conference for the rest of it. So best wishes.